Photoworld, today is the day, August 19th. We have a webinar at 12 noon Central Standard Time. Please go to the webinar tab on takeandtalkpics.com. Click to register today and tune in just a few hours. See you there. Takeandtalkpics.com. I'm Rob Kruger. This is episode 62 with wedding and portrait photographer Jacquelynn Buck.
Well, the world needs more connectors. You know, it's that's what you're doing. You're connecting the people to the information, and I think that's invaluable, really.
Today's featured guest is Jacquelynn Buck. Jacquelynn, are you ready to share with Photoworld today?
I am.
Awesome. Jacquelynn is a full-time portrait and wedding photographer based out of Tucson, Arizona. She has been building her boutique studio for the past 9 years, and she was a speaker at the 2015 WPPI Photography Expo and has been for the past 5 years. Jacquelynn, welcome to Take and Talk Pics.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to get your story out there and share with Photoworld what it is you do and a little bit about your business and the way you work things. Can you start us off with some inspirational quote or mantra that you live by to run your business?
Absolutely. I actually have a favorite quote, and it is, "What would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail?" And that quote has been the driving mantra for my photography since I started, and mostly because I think the idea of failing holds a lot of people back from living their dream. And so if you imagine what you would do if failure wasn't a fear, I think you can dream bigger and do bigger.
Yeah, I think it's awesome to have that here for Photoworld out there, because even myself, every day there's something that I'm a little bit afraid to take the step on, but it's like when I do and it doesn't work out, my goodness, I learn a lot. And it's even better that way. So, How can you fight it? That's awesome. So when you were getting started, it wasn't just 9 years ago that you just picked up and said, hey, I'm going to do a business in photography. You probably were brewing in the idea of photography for a little while. What sparked your interest enough to actually kind of take it on as a career?
Yeah, it's actually kind of an interesting story. I have a unique situation insofar as I have a husband who's in the military, and so we move every 3 years. And I found myself at a place where we had just moved to a location. It was brand new. I didn't know anybody. I was looking for something to get involved in that was outside of the military community, and I was working full-time from home on a grant-funded project for a university in South Carolina. I have a master's in public health, so I was working in public health. It was totally sideways. I got into photography, and I joined a photo club, which sounds completely geeky, but it really actually was the thing that started me on the path. It was a great group of people who just did it for the love of photography. It was mostly nature and landscape. I learned how to use a camera. I learned how to understand light. I learned how to shoot with film, which is how I started. And I really never thought I would photograph people. I thought, mountains, flowers, those are great. They don't move. They don't, have to worry about smiling, not smiling. So I thought I would always do nature and landscape. But there was a point where, and I think most photographers who start out as nature and landscape, they'll find that people say, oh, you do photography? Take pictures of my family. And so you at some point stop saying no and start saying, okay, sure, let me try. So I did. And it was one of those things that I thought, I actually think I could love this. And then just throughout the years that we lived in that place, it was in North Carolina, I really didn't have much in the way of a photography business so much as just following the passion and I did some model shoots. I did some really cool stuff. But then I thought, this is really something I want to do. And so I had the unique situation of moving again, where I could, on the other side of that, just tell everybody I'm a photographer. And so with that mentality, I went forward. Even though I was still working in public health, I basically was like, you know what? I'm going to tell the world I'm a photographer. I'm going to be a photographer, and I'm going to see what happens. So I was able to sort of transition my world into like 50% photography, 50% public health. And then eventually, when we moved the next time after that, I went full-time in photography. So it was sort of an interesting process that really just started with looking for something to do with my free time.
Right.
And I had used cameras before, and my mom was into photography, so she gave me her camera, but it was never anything serious, it was just, taking it around for fun and taking pictures of flowers and stuff. So it was not something I ever thought that I wanted to do as a career, but it sort of, I got bit by the passion for it, or bit by the bug, and never looked back pretty much.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I hope Photoworld is resonating with that story, because I feel like mine was very similar, starting out with doing the nature and landscapes and things like that. And I really loved it because it never talked back, you know, not like a wedding client can do sometimes. But I've transitioned to weddings and make my business out of that, and I love it. You know, I really do. But it's just kind of funny how we're afraid of people at first, a lot of photographers, and it's just easier to just get acquainted with the camera in the world around you rather than in somebody else's world around them, you know. But
and
then,
now I can't go by a mountain or anything and not be like, oh, what if I had a bride in there, or what if I had like look at that street scene. I want to put a person in that street.
All those beautiful landscapes are just nice backgrounds now.
Yes, that's all they are now.
Nothing wrong with that though. No. Nope. That's awesome. So when we're going through our businesses, and you've had to restart, you know, a few times, you know, and that's pretty crazy and a scary moment for a lot of people. People decide, hey, I might want to move. But the big fear is like, I have this base for my business. It's difficult to move on. And through those times, you've probably learned a lot. And I think we learn through our failure moments. Can you recall a time when you had a moment where you were really learning from a failure that you went through?
There is one moment distinctly I remember. I actually started out mostly with boudoir photography when I started photographing people. And it kind of started with a woman who was going through sort of a life transition, who wanted me to do this for her as sort of a celebration of self. And so I worked with her very closely, and it was an amazing session. And so I started advertising my boudoir photography. Well, I came across a client probably about in the first year that I was doing photography seriously, but not yet full time. And she wanted boudoir photography, I thought. And so we had sort of a conversation about it, but she really kind of wanted something that was less seductive and more kind of business formal. It was meant to be sort of a photo for a match.com kind of thing. So we went through a couple of conversations where I thought that I knew what she wanted. So she came to the studio, she paid her deposit, I did the photos, I did them in the style that I had been doing at that time, which was very largely shadows more than light. So black backdrop, that kind of thing, which I still do today, but it was like very largely that at the time. And when she saw the photos, she did not like them. And she's like, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I thought you were going to give me. This is way different. I really don't think that this is for me. And so I learned that the conversations that I had been having with her were not clear. They were clear to me because I was speaking the language I was familiar with, but they weren't clear to her. We were talking about two different things. When I said boudoir, she agreed, but we didn't, and it's not like she got there and got naked or half naked, you know what I mean? It wasn't like that unclear, but it was more just, in the end, she really didn't want what she thought she wanted or what I thought she wanted. Mm-hmm. She really just wanted business headshots, as it turned out. And we did something that was a lot more edgy and just, you know, the color toning and the black background. Anyway, long story short, I learned the hard way. I refunded her money because I didn't want to have a fight with her about, you know, who was right or wrong or what the conversation should have been. And so I learned very, very quickly that having a conversation where you spell everything out, it can save your time and your money, and really like learning to communicate with clients makes all the difference. Because just because they say they want candid photography, they don't know necessarily what candid means. You know, they could be reading from a website that says, here are the top 5 things you should ask your photographer. You know, and it just, I think that you have to be on the same page with your client with visuals and with, you know, ways to communicate what those words mean, as opposed to just assuming you're on the same page because you're saying the same word. So.
Yeah, that's all a really great story, and I'm glad you brought it in such detail, because that communication thing is huge. It's enormous. Like, I've had to redo my contract over and over and over in those first year or so of weddings, because I learned that, you know, non-refundable deposit needs to be very spelled out, you know, before you get taken for a ride, and some people, you know, thinking it wasn't as good as it should have been or whatever. And, you know, things happen. So you have to educate your clients, because you're going to do photography a certain way. Somebody else they're going to meet with is going to do it a different way. So you have to educate them in the way you're going to go, their expectations, what they're getting for what they're paying for. It is so incredibly valuable to learn that early on. So thank you for sharing it with Photoworld today. If they haven't encountered that already, they can be warned, fairly warned. All right, Photoworld, you've been warned. You can go out there and really think about what you're laying out for the expectations for your work. So that's a good story, and thank you for sharing it. Sure. So when we're going through our businesses, we want to grow. We can't just pick up a camera and the phone's going to start ringing, because that's just not realistic. What's one thing that you could share with Photoworld you think would lead to growth and success in a photography business regardless of their current level?
I think that one of the things that I have found to be really important is understanding profitability and the business side of photography, right? So no matter what level you're at, some people don't feel like they can charge a certain amount because they're at a certain level. Some people feel like they're still too new and they're learning. And I encourage people who are still learning to continue to learn before they start charging for photography. Because I think what happens is the industry is so varied that we have photographers for every client and for every budget level, but we end up with sort of a discrepancy when it comes to people who are either afraid to charge what they're worth. And so you compare those people to the people who are just as good and charging twice as much, or you have people who haven't quite got the basics down yet, who are charging so much that they're kind of skewing the I don't know, the baseline or whatever you want to call it. So understanding what you're worth, I think, is important. Charging what you're worth is important, but learning to get to the point where you can feel confident charging what you're worth is also part of the process. Because you just, I mean, for example, a wedding photographer, you just pick up your camera and you say, I'm a wedding photographer. You go shoot a wedding and you bomb that wedding. Well, that wedding, you know, you can't redo that. So I would encourage someone going into wedding photography not to assume that because they can do portraits, they can do weddings,
Right.
And instead mentor with a wedding photographer, second shoot, assist, do all of the things that you need to do to get the experience level to where you're comfortable knowing that you can go into that situation and that moment when it can't be done over, you know, you can't do a wedding over, you feel confident going in and charging appropriately for the services. So understanding, like, also, and I started out with profitability, understanding what you're making from what you're charging, I think is also important. Because, you know, we talk about the shoot and burn photographers and the people who charge $500 and, you know, go and give a CD the images, or $50 or $100 or whatever it is. It's fine if it works for you, but a lot of people, I think, aren't clear on the fact that just because you're charging $100 for something means you're getting $100 from that something.
Right.
You have to look at your long-term monetary goals. What are you spending? What are you spending on your business on a daily, on a monthly? And are you charging appropriately to make a living and not just a hobby? So I guess that's kind of two different things all wrapped up into one.
They are wrapped up into one. And I think it's a really good thing to bring up. The business stuff is all we end up doing. The photography is so minimal of what we actually do with our business. So it's really important to consider what kind of costs you have, what kind of, you know, influx of finance you're getting, and how it balances out. Because you can't just, I'm a photographer and I live with mom and dad, so I'm making all this money and I'm not going to do my taxes. I don't know how to do that. It's just a little side cash. Yeah, but it's illegal. So like you gotta play it smart, and just doing a little research can go a long way. And start with asking photographers who are in business. Start with that, because they've already messed up so many times early on. You know, they figured that out. You know, so aside from the internet, call up a local photographer and find out from them. So I don't know. I could go on that topic, those two little points, for a long time about value and where people are charging and the actual ability. Photoworld, the way to shorten it up, be realistic about who you are, what you're capable of, and what you should expect from your clients versus what they should expect from you. Just be fair and realistic. That's all. So I'll move on. I'm sorry. I digress.
It's easy to digress on that topic.
So, Jacquelynn, have you had an aha moment during your career? Something where that light bulb just went off, you started changing things, and all of a sudden there was an increase or a spike in your business where things were going a lot better?
You know, and it's funny, they're not paying me to say this, but attending WPPI was a huge aha moment for me. It came at a point in my career. I had been following Rangefinder magazine for about 2 years, reading the magazine, seeing WPPI advertised in the magazine, and had always thought, you know, I want to go to that conference when I feel ready. I want to go and I want to see what happens, because I felt like that would be a turning point. And it actually was. I saved money to go. I went all in the first year that I went. I did everything, the master's classes, the plus classes, the platforms, everything. Like, I saturated myself in photography for 8 days. And I walked away from there going, this is it. This is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And coming back from that, and just like any conference or retreat or whatever, you come back from it with sort of like a high of like, oh, I've got all this stuff I want to do, and all these great things, but I seriously implemented it. Like I didn't just come home and be like, okay, great, that was fun. I actually made lists, and I made purchases, I made things, and I was poised to do that. So it wasn't like I came home and blew a bunch of money I didn't have. It was more like I had been kind of waiting for that moment, knew that it was a big deal, got home and said, yep, this is it. This is what I want to do. So that was really it for me. It was largely around lighting, actually. There was so much I learned at that particular conference about lighting and how to light weddings and how to use creative light versus just natural light. And I just kind of took off with that and started sort of playing with that more and doing more with that when it came to weddings. So that was really a big turning point for me. And that was only about 3 years into it for me. So
yeah, conferences are a big deal and they can change everything for you. But you took it a step further, and I'm glad you brought it up, that you started to implement it and not stupidly just spending and, oh, I need this camera and that lens. No, you just took it to, I got to start doing this differently for my business. I got to start doing this differently for my lighting, and starting applying each thing, each change that you were learning and taking it to the next level. Because I don't know if there's a real statistic, but I feel like 90% of people who go to conferences, they don't actually implement what they're learning.
Right.
It's like they save up to get this exciting high and meet all these people and have a good time. And then they're like, oh, I'll see you next year, and just do it again. And but are you growing? Are you doing your business? Are you doing what you want? You know, and I think this brings us to the I made it moment. I don't think there's one just, you know, hey, we made it. I'm officially the greatest photographer ever. And then, because if that was the case, we'd be done, you know? Mm-hmm. So we're learning, we're growing, we're getting to different places. Have you had a time where you felt like this highlight moment where it's like, you know, maybe I'm doing the right thing and I can continue with this?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's also tied to the WPPI conferences. I attended as a student for 2 years running, and I had the opportunity to meet Bill Herder, who at the time was the editor for Rangefinder. And I reached out to him and asked him if I could be published. I had an article idea. It was the boudoir photography, which I call real women photography. So it's kind of a different bent on boudoir. It's more about the woman as she is, her, you know, regardless of size, shape, age, race, gender, preference, whatever. It's all about just celebrating the woman, or, you know, and for her, not necessarily, of course, giving it to a significant other is a great byproduct, but it's really supposed to be about her and the confidence boosting. So I had this great idea. I wanted to publish, I wanted to write an article about it. And I was really attached to not just writing the article, or not just the photos, but writing the article as well. So he and I went a couple of rounds over email, and I really, I don't want to say I pushed for it, but I fought for it. Like, I really wanted that article published. And eventually he agreed and edited it, and we made it happen. So in July of 2010, I was published in Rangefinder for this Real Women Photography. And after that, I felt, of course, this elated version of me, like, oh my gosh, I've done it. I've made it. I've been published. And then I thought, well, you know what? What's one step up from that? I want to teach. I want to teach boudoir, because my educational background has some curriculum type stuff in it. Like, I was in public health, and so I was learning to teach what I was doing. And so I wanted to use those tools and apply it to the photography. So I did. I asked Bill, I said, how can I teach? How can I apply to teach at WPPI? And so he sent me the proposal form, and I filled it out, and I was accepted. And I've been teaching ever since, every year, boudoir photography. And it's really been, I mean, to me, that is sort of, that's been the goal. Like, the goal is to not just be confident enough to do it for me and for my business, but be confident enough to share that with other people so that they can learn. And I think that those have been big ahas or big, yeah, I guess what did you call it?
I made it moments.
I made it moments.
Yeah.
The other one, the aha
no,
moments.
And it's beautiful because it's like you got that publication, you're like, I made it. I got that feeling, that high, that accomplishment. And then what's next? Hey, I'm going to go see if I can teach, you know, and now you've made it and you've been doing it each year. So, you know, you're probably working on something else that's going to be next for you, and find your next I made it moment. And I'm actually going to probably ask you about it in a little bit here. But before we get there, can you share with Photoworld the best advice you've ever received during your career so far?
Oh, wow. So the best advice, and I don't know that it came from one particular source, but it truly has been a amassing of knowledge insofar as focusing on the business first. We are business owners first. We are photographers second. you can teach a person to run a business. There are classes out there, there are ways to understand marketing and networking and all of the things that go into running business, profit and loss and business plans and all those things. It can be taught. And so if you are in any way, shape, or form trying to become a photographer, you need to have those business fundamentals down. And I learned that the hard way. Like you talked about, having 17 iterations of your contract. It's the same thing. Like I had to go through my contract 100 times based on mistakes. I had to redo my business and marketing based on mistakes and things that weren't working. And the truth is, there are resources out there where you can learn what you need to learn without having to make all those mistakes that I made. And so that really has been the biggest thing for me, is learning that you always have to be focusing on your business, not as much on your photography, because if you don't have a good business model, the photography is actually irrelevant to a degree.
Right.
So,
I mean, there are many great business people who are photographers. I'd say they're great business people, but not great photographers, but they're doing really well. And it's because they understand the strategy of how you run a business, how you treat people, how you interact, because it really is important and it really does make the difference. So if you can couple that with good photography or great photography, you're not going to have a problem there, Photoworld. And you have to invest in yourself, not only in your gear and your photography education, but your business education. So you always invest in your business. And that never stops. You got to keep learning because things are changing a mile a minute, especially today. It's crazy. So you've had to start your business over from different locations. And I always kind of do this, what if you've had to start it over, but you can actually call an experience here. Going to a new location and starting it over, what is one thing that you do first to do this relaunch?
There are a couple of things. One is a little bit of groundwork before you go. And in my case, I did about 3 months of groundwork before every move to kind of put myself into the location before I actually moved. And then I started sort of pre-working on the fact that I was about to be there by actually acting as though I was there already. Whenever I post on Facebook or on my blog or whatever, it would have the appropriate tags and labels that are associated with the new location versus the old. And then also networking has been huge for me. So moving into a situation where you don't know anybody, finding a networking group, whether it's a wedding networking group or another photographer networking group, or just a networking group in general that's independent or irrelevant to photography, I think making those local connections are so important, because you can do a ton of stuff on the internet. You can do a ton of stuff through blogging and through hashtagging and all of that. But the one-on-one connections and the word of mouth referrals really are going to also pave the way. So I really try to focus on those things. I focus on, the internet marketing. I focus on the one-on-one networking and group networking. And then the third part is really just getting out there and shooting, finding places to shoot with people, whether you need to do a couple of discounted sessions or new kid on the block sessions or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I don't usually advise doing things for free necessarily. You have to do what works for your business model, but just getting people in the locations that are local to where you're living can make a difference, because when people see your work, and if you're like me, I moved from Georgia to Tucson, I feel like everyone saw my website was full of green and trees and whatever. And so, to say I'm a Tucson photographer, people might look at my website and be like, well, where was that? Because that doesn't look like Tucson. So a lot of times you just have to make sure that you're doing some work that is local to the location, and tagging those locations too, so people start to associate your name with the location.
Well, you're saying tagging these locations and doing the legwork ahead of time. That kind of all goes into the blog, which I see yours is pretty active. Really good marketing strategy, just getting your name out there. Blogs are not a fast return, but over time, they are a very helpful return. So Photoworld, if you're thinking about how do I get my name out there a little bit more, in the meantime, whatever you're doing, blog about it. Put up a little post, show an image or two, get some content out there. Content is key. It really is. So you have to share to be valuable, to exist really in this space, because we are stuck online. It's almost devastating. But that face-to-face thing, you can get to a Chamber of Commerce meeting, just sit in on one when you first get to a new area, or join one when you get to a new area. Meetup groups when you arrive, there's plenty of them starting it up. And if there aren't, start one yourself. There are people looking for that same stuff. So start a meetup group to go out and shoot and hang out and have a good time, and use your ability to network with the other people who are interested in it and kind of spread the word too. I don't know. I get so excited with this stuff. I want to move and try it and see what happens, So when we're running our businesses, we're always looking for the latest, greatest thing to implement. And I've kind of boiled it down to an idea of, do you have an app or an internet resource that you could share with Photoworld you think we could benefit from knowing about?
I love my iPhone, and I really, really love staying connected through my iPhone, through Instagram, through Facebook. And so I find that a lot of times when I'm getting excited about something, I want to share it with the world. I want it to look as good as possible in terms of a photo. So I'm a photographer. The stuff I take with my iPhone obviously is not necessarily as good as the stuff I take with my camera, but I want it to look good, and I want it to be in a style that I think is noticeable. So I use Snapseed. It's one of my favorite apps on the iPhone. I love, love, love what it does for the photos. It allows me to do a lot of fine tuning, actually, which I think is kind of phenomenal. I can do it from a phone, but even, selective adjusting and things like that now, which I really like. People often comment on my Facebook photos and they think that it's taken with a camera when it's really taken with my iPhone. I'm like, no, that was an iPhone picture. Well, how do you get it to look like that? So that's just one of my favorites, but that's obviously, it's only a marketing tool insofar as, it's just keeping my brand consistent. It's keeping my brand out there. Regardless of what I do, I want it to look good.
Right. Yeah. And we've had Snapseed mentioned on the show before, and I checked it out and put it on my iPad. I was like, this thing is awesome. Like, there's so much you can do with it. So Photoworld, I can vouch for it also, that it's a really great app and really cool to use. Obviously, I don't go walking around with my iPad all that often, but when I do, I have this cool app to work with. But it's really fun. So Photoworld, you can find this and everything else we talk about on the show notes page on takingtalkpics.com. Just type in Jacquelynn. It's a unique spelling, so maybe type in her last name, Buck, and that'll get you there just the same. To see her show notes, and we'll have her social links, Snapseed as a recommendation, and her website and everything, so you can follow along with what she's doing. But moving on here, Jacquelynn, do you have a recent or an upcoming project that you've been working on or had been working on that you're excited about?
Yeah, there's this really cool app that I am actually a part of. It's a travel app, travel photography, and I fell into this one sideways too. I was approached by a photographer at the WPPI conference the second year I was teaching, and he actually hired me to teach at his conference in Prague. And so I taught at his conference in Prague, and then he went on to design and develop this app called Fripito, and it's Fripito. And he asked me to be a part of the app. And so basically what it is it's travel photography that incorporates, so it's by location. You download the app for free, but then you purchase the locations. And if you are going to a location on vacation, it will show you some of the hot spots to photograph. It'll show you pictures taken from that location. It'll give you GPS data to find the location. It'll give you tips about the photography, what were the settings of the camera when this photo was taken. And so it's kind of a neat collaborative effort with other photographers. And I've done a Tucson location. I did Western Sicily as well. So I had the opportunity to go to Sicily for 10 days 2 years ago and really kind of photo documented the whole thing and was able to use that. Wow. So it's a really neat project. And I wish I'd had something like that the last time I traveled somewhere had never been before. So
Fripito, is that right?
Yes.
Very
Fripito.
Cool. I'll have that on the show notes as well for you, Photoworld. You got to check that out and, start seeing what's hot out there and the different places you can find. Jacquelynn, before we wrap it up today, can you share with Photoworld one parting piece of guidance and then the best way that we can reach you, whether it be your website or some sort of social media, and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay. I would like to say that and I think this kind of goes back to the quote that I shared with what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail. I think so often we are victims of our circumstances when we can be champions of them instead. And so I think that discouragement is part of life, but to try to minimize discouragement, I would say don't compare yourself to other photographers. Don't compare yourself price-wise to other people doing what you're doing. Don't compare yourself at all. You are you are unique. You are the photographer that you need to be in the time that you need to be at. There really you don't gain benefit from stalking people on Facebook and seeing what other people are doing and why is that person doing it better and that person got this client and I didn't. We can get sort of mired in that muck so easily. And I really think that that's a downfall for social media in general. We get so caught up in everybody else's stuff that we fail to be who we are. And so, there's a photographer out there for every client. And if you're that photographer, all you have to be is you. And I think that's the most important part, not being your neighbor, not being the other photographer down the block, but being who you are, and you will uniquely shine, and you will make it. So.
Right on, right on. Where can we follow along with what you're doing?
Well, my blog is a great way. Actually, it's just my website. It's set up like a blog. So it's jacquelynnbuck.com. But you can find me. Everything I have is under Jacquelynn Buck. So Twitter is at Jacquelynn Buck. Instagram is Jacquelynn Buck. LinkedIn is Jacquelynn Buck. So it's all sort of consistent. But starting at my website, you can kind of link to me everywhere from there.
Very good. And again, Photoworld will have this on her show notes page on takingtalkpics.com if you can't find it on your own. When you're looking at Jacquelynn's work, be inspired by her. Learn from her. Don't compare yourself to her, because her work is beautiful, but don't start comparing it. You got to be authentic. And I love that as a great parting piece of guidance. So thank you for sharing that. Jacquelynn, I cannot thank you enough for your time today and sharing such great value. Photoworld thanks you, and happy shooting.
Thank you.
Photoworld, are you looking for a way to make your images pop to that next level? Head to takingtalkpics.com, go to the affiliates page, and from there you will see Free Vault photography products. We have worked out a special deal with Free Vault photography products, so you can get 15% off your next purchase. Just enter Take and Talk 15. Spell it out, Take and Talk, then the number 15. takeandtalkpics.com. Thank you again for joining us today, and we really appreciate you stopping by. Make sure you share this with your friends and photo family out there. We'll see you next time. This is Rob Kruger. Happy shooting.